Federalist Papers. What are they, you may ask? The Federalist Papers were a compilation of ideas of three brilliant men that molded and shaped the government of the American frontier. Unfortunately, these important documents are either forgotten or altogether unknown by many. Without this collection of 85 essays, we would not have our United States Constitution today. These 85 articles were amazingly written by only three different men. These men were John Jay, James Madison, and possibly the most widely known, Alexander Hamilton. Unfortunately, they, along with their contributions, are often forgotten piece of the American frontier. Their collective voices through the writing and publishing of the Federalist Papers were key in the complete acceptance and ratification of the newly created United States Constitution. They must not be forgotten. Before we talk about the role the Federalist Papers played in the development of the government of New American Frontier, we must first talk about the authors behind the beautiful 85 essays. Let's begin with the least prominent of the three, John Jay. John Jay was a New York native and one of the founding fathers of America. He served in a multitude of government positions, but is most widely recognized for the time he served as the first Chief Justice. He contributed to 5 out of the 85 essays, known as the Federalist Papers. Then there is James Madison. James Madison is often said to be the founding father of the Constitution. He was a Virginian native, similar to George Washington, as he was born in 1751 in Orange County. Both James Madison and Alexander Hamilton were integral to the ratification of the new United States Constitution. In addition to his 29 essay contributions to the Federalist Papers, James Madison went on to serve as the 4th President of the United States. The most prominent of his 29 essays is the Federalist 10. In this essay, Madison detailed how the Constitution would protect against factions. Between these two men, and 34 essays were authored. The remaining 51 were authored by Hamilton. No, not Hamilton the musical, Alexander Hamilton. While the musical details a lot of who Hamilton was, it's not exact. Alexander Hamilton was born 6 years prior to James Madison. He was born in 1757 in Charleston, Nevis, in the West Indies. Around the age of 9, Hamilton and his mother moved away from the island. Yet, they would later return when his mother met and married James Hamilton. This is how Alexander became Alexander Hamilton. Unfortunately, Hamilton's father left him and his mother, and at the age of 11, Hamilton's mother died. At 18, he left the island once again, this time for good. He went to New York where he pursued a career in government. During the American Revolution, Hamilton served under the command of the future and first president, George Washington. After the Revolution, during the development of the government system of the new American frontier, Hamilton authored an astounding 51 essays. His contribution was most important work, as his essays account for 51 out of 85 essays, known as the Federalist Papers. Now that we've been introduced to the authors behind the Federalist Papers, we now need a better understanding of how and why they were ever written. Following the 13 colonies' victory in the Revolutionary War, the very new United States was in shambles. At the time, we had no true government and or constitution. In response, James Madison began drafting the Constitution, as well as the first 10 amendments in 1787. The biggest problem with the new United States Constitution was that many people didn't want it to be ratified. These people were known as the Anti-Federalist. I know, a very original name, right? Well, actually, surprisingly, it is. The Anti-Federalist Papers were released prior to the Federalist Papers that we now know today. After the attempted drafting and ratification of the new Constitution, the people against the ratification released a statement fighting back against the proposed Constitution. They created the Anti-Federalist Papers in September of 1787. The Anti-Federalist Papers, as they became known, were a group of mostly farmers, shopkeepers, and or laborers. One of the most well-known writers was a man by the name of Robert Yates. Their central focus of the papers was to argue that a more state-focused constitution would be better rather than a more central-focused constitution. Their main concern was the fact that the new Constitution would be too powerful, given there was no Bill of Rights at the time, which worried them. So they called for the creation of the Bill of Rights, which was later adopted by the Federalists. Yet these anti-Federalist papers angered the Federalists, so in response, Hamilton, Jay, and Madison banded together to create possibly the most influential frontier and pieces of writing made to this day. They started these papers in October of 1787 and finished them in May of 1788. These revolutionary pieces of writing argued that there should be a weaker state government and a strong centralized government, as well as things such as longer terms for officials, indirect elections, and finally, the idea of representative rather than direct democracy. At first, the papers were released slowly throughout the New York Packet newspapers under the anonymous name Publicists. Then, as they gained attention, they began to be reprinted all over New York. Following the release of the anti-Federalist papers, which led to the release and widespread Federalist papers, this frontier changed the United States forever. In the eyes of the Federalists, the papers were a complete success. However, to the anti-Federalists, it was a major setback. Following the release of the papers, the vote in New Hampshire was swayed in favor of the immediate ratification of the new and official United States Constitution. Following the ratification in New Hampshire, Virginia soon followed after them, as well as, eventually, New York itself. However, the Constitution at the time wasn't and still isn't perfect. Although it had its flaws, it was the best that the young United States had at the time. Alexander Hamilton himself even stated this in Federalist 85, stating that a nation without a national government is, in my view, an awful spectacle. However, the Constitution wasn't ratified without an agreement from the anti-Federalist. They were allowed to have recommendations regarding the Constitution when it was put into effect. During this time of the ratification of the Constitution, it affected citizens during that time. The Constitution to this day still affects us, as it still protects our rights and our freedom as citizens. Along with protecting our rights, it also protects us from the government, limiting their power and ability to control us. The Federalist Papers. Still and always a monumental frontier and piece in the United States history. Yet sadly, it is still widely unknown by many. Yet as seen, this collection of 85 essays is the sole reason that led to the ratification and overall acceptance of the new United States Constitution. This extremely important group of 85 articles that was astoundingly only written by 3 different men. These men, who we now know, were John Jay, James Madison, and the most influential to his time, Alexander Hamilton. Yet sometimes they are sadly forgotten about, but however, hopefully, now you know them, along with their component, that is, the frontier, that led to the ratification and complete acceptance of the new United States Constitution. God bless America.